Podcast. This is Samuel.
This is Gabe.
Today we are at least tentatively talking about Robo-Pets.
Animals that aren't. So
yes,
when
exactly.
when it looks like a duck and talks like a duck but still isn't a duck. Which Robo-Pets, or these sort of fake animals, show up a lot in science fiction.
Oh yeah.
And are oftentimes like very favorite characters.
Well, like Star Wars droids.
Right.
Which is, and then so you got the classic C-3PO and R2-D2, right? And I think that is a really interesting way to kind of maybe maneuver into this idea, because one represents what we're talking about and one doesn't. And that would be 3PO is he's not like a robo-pet. He's like a cyborg. Not a cyborg, he's an android.
Right.
But he even is made to look humanoid.
Right.
He has a face, he has hands and arms, he's bipedal. You know what I mean? Like he's very humanoid. Whereas R2 is, now he has personality.
Yeah.
But he's not humanoid. He's very much, I don't know, he kind of blurs that line.
Right.
And what I mean by as opposed to, like the mechanical owl in Clash of the Titans.
Okay.
Right? That's something that is much more, it's just like an animal sidekick,
So maybe one thing that would be
there's
fun
a
to
gradient. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, maybe one thing that would be fun to talk about today then would be Muppets in general. Because I find it very interesting that the Muppets ever became a thing at all.
Really?
And I also just love Henson's work across the board. It's all fabulous. Labyrinth and Dark Crystal are two of my favorite movies. But one of the things that's interesting about the Muppets is that what Henson was able to do was figure out a ratio for a puppet or an animatronic that would register on camera or to someone watching a movie as though the animal or the Muppet face was looking at the camera or looking at another thing. It's this ratio between eyes to mouth that makes the Muppet appear more than a puppet.
That it has like some vitality.
Yeah.
That has some vim. That's interesting because it's a little bit different than the idea of the Uncanny Valley. It's not a strict representation or an abject representation. It's something that actually, instead of recoil, it's kind of invitational. Yeah. Maybe in the way that like Scott McCloud in that book on comics was talking about the cartoon face. That you can take an absolute realism, like a portrayal of a face, and diminish it down to its key components, where you get the cartoon smiley face, which is a circle, two dots, and a mouth, right? But still, that evokes in us this idea of a face, of a person. We see that in there. I don't know. It seems like Henson's ratio is kind of maybe between those two ideas.
Yeah. Well, I guess I wonder, can animals fall into the Uncanny Valley?
I think that it's I think that there's a very strong anthropomorphism. Obviously, I think that if you see, like, there's a reason why C-3PO is made out of metal. That he doesn't have like a fleshy skin. Because if he had like a fleshy skin, he would definitely fall in the Uncanny Valley.
Right.
Whereas, but because he doesn't, we can see that he's not human. Right. But we can also see how human he is. And we can kind of overlay those two and pick and choose which of those we want to engage with when we engage with that character. Muppets are the same way. We know that it's not real, but we can participate with it as if it were real. I think what the problem when something falls in the Uncanny Valley, it problematizes your engagement with that choice.
Right. But I kind of tend to think that only human faces can fall into that.
I would think, and I think that that's the way it was meant by, what's his name? Miro? This is a Japanese guy. I feel like an idiot right now. The guy that coined the Uncanny Valley.
Yeah, I don't know.
Anyway, but it was all about, it's just human faces.
Yeah.
And I don't think that animals can do that unless maybe like the bonobo, or maybe, or there's certain anthropoids.
Yeah.
That if you see them in particular contexts.
Certain actual animals can certainly fall into the Uncanny Valley.
Yeah.
I mean, apes, as soon as you put clothes on them or get them doing human things,
smoking cigars and riding unicycles.
Like that little ape man that runs around with Marlon Brando on the island of Dr. Moreau.
Yeah.
That then gets his own character in South Park.
Yeah.
Which I think he's just a little animal. Like, I don't think he's
in which? In South Park?
Oh, in the movie. I think he's just a little ape, right? They sort of have dressed up.
Oh, in the actual shooting of it?
Yeah.
Man, I don't know.
But he looks like some kind of weird humanoid thing.
What's interesting, we were bringing up Moreau because, I mean, isn't that a lot of the question in that story? Is this idea, I mean, obviously there's a lot going on in there. We can return to this later, actually, when we have a episode about mad scientists.
Right.
But there is a lot of problematic relations with creatures.
Yeah.
I hate to even say animals, but creatures that they kind of dip their toes in that Uncanny Valley or whatever waters run there.
Right.
See, man. Yeah, maybe not the Uncanny Valley, but I think that R2-D2 and some of the other droids, BB-8 especially, in Episode 7, they have a kind of human personality. Maybe not human. They have a more complicated personality than we even allow some domestic pets like our dogs to have. It's something that's elevated a little beyond that, probably because of AI. But R2 has his own personality.
Yeah,
but it doesn't resemble anything organic beyond that behavior of even calling it personality.
Yeah.
So what does that mean?
There's something interesting about the older mechanical creatures, from the owl to Henson's creatures to all of that, in that they have a performance, right? There's a performer, or maybe several performers in the case of Jabba the Hutt or something like that. And there's a performance that is able to be communicated there. And I wonder if we lose that in something like the bear from The Revenant, where you just have the creature animated there. Not that it isn't necessarily artistic, or not that there isn't vision behind it.
Right.
But I wonder if there's something special about these older animatronics that having a puppeteer sets them apart. Okay, now, what about... Okay, say like you're at Chuck E. Cheese or something like that. Yeah.
And there's the animatronic band.
Yeah.
To me, that approaches the Uncanny Valley. Because there's this face, right. And they're not human. You're talking about a singing bear.
It's
playing a banjo or whatever. Right. And that creep factor to me is a huge red flag of, well, what are we talking about, the Uncanny Valley here? And that, And
so maybe there is an Uncanny Valley for fake animals or for puppets.
Right. I see.
Even ones that don't look human.
Right. Or don't look absolute human. For me, maybe we're talking about an idea of narrative. If it exists outside of narrative, but still is representational, like that animatronic bear, right? Singing bear. that's on a loop, and it'll start and stop, but it doesn't participate in any kind of grand narrative.
Okay.
There's just an interaction with it. Whereas, like in a movie, there's characters that are interacting with other characters, and we see a story arc, and we know that there are performers, doing that. There's a little guy inside of R2, even if you, engage in a willful suspension of disbelief, to say that, oh no, that's a real thing. That's an autonomous thing that is R2-D2. I don't know, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah, I think that's... But it's interesting is that example is in real life, not in the film.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, because I was thinking there are other variations of this, beyond just like... Because I wrote out a whole list of these potential like Robo-Pets or sidekicks, and some of them, like, I was thinking like the Tamagotchi. Do you remember that old? It was like a keychain little thing, and you fed this little pet, but it was all digital, and you had to keep up with it or it would die.
Right.
And then I was thinking like Teddy Ruxpin.
Right.
To me, that is the same kind of... It nears that creep factor of like the Chuck E. Cheese singing bear.
Yeah.
But again, it's mechanical and it moves, but it doesn't really participate in a narrative unless it's performing. Like it could read you bedtime stories. You could put tapes in its back, and it would read to you.
Right.
But
again, that's in real life. These are all encounters. So I guess I think we should make a distinction between pseudo animals or animatronics that we encounter in narrative and in art. And then when we encounter them in life as digital pets. And maybe those are two different, totally separate, I don't know, fields or concepts. I mean, it seems like an animatronic creature in a movie we relate to entirely differently because we relate to it through its place in the narrative,
right,
and through the way in which the human characters interact with it, and sort of give it a substance. But then I think the idea of digital pets or false pets is something completely different.
Okay, yeah, for sure,
and has a whole bunch of different limiting factors on how we interact with them and judge them.
I totally agree with that. I was also thinking, one of my favorite video games growing up was Mega Man 2, and he had this dog, a sidekick. It was a robot dog, and depending on which form you were, he would change to, or it would change to, depending on what form it would change its abilities, to aid you in moving through these levels. And I thought that was a really interesting representation of the robotic pet, because it's not necessarily within a narrative, but it's also not a direct interaction in real life.
Yeah.
You interact with it, certainly, because you control what's happening within this on the screen within the game. So there's this kind of overlay of the two fields, maybe. And then it got me to think about, well, then is it a question of utility more than anything? Then obviously it's personality that is coded into the game so that you can enjoy it more, But that idea of utility, maybe, I don't know, it just seems like there's a different kind of work that's happening, like the Teddy Ruxpin or whatever you're interacting with in real life, and then the kind of creature you interact with on the screen. They do different work, right?
So can the can the artificial pet ever not be creepy?
Man, I'm not sure. Like, well, we were talking about AI earlier.
Yeah.
There's two versions of this that happen in AI. there's both David, who's the robot, or the android, the boy, and his companion Teddy,
right?
Who was the first, can be thought of as David's first iteration, because they were brought into the house to be the companion of the organic boy child,
right?
And he's like the new version of the Teddy, of the animatronic teddy bear. And so they both are performing the same kind of deal, except for that one is more human because it looks more human, maybe?
Yeah.
I don't know. But one is certainly more creepy than the other.
Yeah. Because
David falls into the uncanny valley, whereas Teddy doesn't.
Yeah.
Because he's a teddy bear.
Right.
And it's kind of cute when you see something that acts human that's not human, like R2 is adorable, but he's basically a trash can with lights. You know, I mean, not to talk bad on R2, he's my favorite character, but essentially that's what he is, and yet we find him adorable.
Yeah.
Because it's something that shouldn't be human that acts human.
Yeah.
But then when you have something that, for all intents and purposes, appears human and also acts human, but isn't. I don't know. Maybe is that a question of, is it excess then? Is that... Well, because your question was, can a Robo-Pet not be creepy?
Right.
Maybe only if it doesn't approach excess. Or do we put a limit? Do we invoke a kind of law?
Yeah.
That then we say, do not pass this threshold. And when they do, there's a kind of abjectness.
Yeah. And they cross that threshold by being too realistic. By convincing us for a second that they're really something.
Mm-hmm.
But I know you've been thinking, or you have been thinking about digital pets and these kinds of things with your project that you did for Richardson.
Oh, yeah.
I guess about a year ago.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe you should say a little bit about that project and what went into it and give kind of the rundown.
Okay.
And then maybe it would be fun to actually have on this podcast, and you can edit this in yourself, I suppose, have some of the music on there.
Oh, from Amoeba
and
Devices.
Give some commentary.
Yeah, I could do that, for sure.
So yeah, I mean, I guess you can edit this sort of back and forth right now out later, but you know what we should do for this episode is have a brief introduction, which we pull from what we've just been talking, and then you should just take your music and introduce the story of Amoeba Devices for this episode, and play your music, edit it into it, and have that be the rest of the podcast.
Yeah, I might do it as like a split off, like episode 3.5 or something.
Yeah.
And then I can talk about that.
You should have an episode where you just give your Amoeba Devices music
story and
give the story, and in between the tracks, give that.
That'd be fun.
So
could do that.
Anyway, you can cut this particular back and forth out later,
or we could leave it in. It's more meta that way.
Meta isn't always beta.
That's true. But rhymes are.
All right, yeah. So tell me about Amoeba Devices and this project you embarked on, imagining pets.
So the digitization aspect of the pets came from this idea that in the future you could retain ideas about your pet in a kind of digital memorial. So you could basically have this collar that would record your dog's entire life, including its vitals and its three-dimensional positionality in space and everything about it, what it did. And after your dog had passed, or your pet in general, I mean, it could be a cat or monkey, it wouldn't matter. But you could basically replay that life on a loop in a kind of hologram.
Okay.
And then there was another future variation of that learned like through art, use some artificial intelligence to mimic that your dog's behavior that had been recorded its whole life, so that it would even learn to, when you came home, this holographic dog would still like greet you as if it always had, and recognize you, and basically it wouldn't have any physical presence, but your pet could like live forever. I don't know, and I thought that raised a lot of really interesting questions about, well, like just life in general, but also appreciation for things in your life. By not letting your dog ever really die.
Right.
You're actually kind of taking its life. You're not letting it have a complete narrative. You're forcing. It's not letting the ghost go.
Right.
Keeping the ghost prisoner.
Yeah.
Which I don't know. There's something obviously very selfish about that, but understandable. With through grief. I don't know. That was definitely one aspect of it, but I think that pulls into question also the idea of the utility that we want to assign to our pets, or in stories to our sidekicks.
Right.
And I think that when we have them as non-organic, or if they're robotic or mechanical in some way, it kind of alleviates maybe some of that guilt in assigning so much utility. Maybe.
Interesting. Yeah, so what gets lost when we imagine ourselves as having digital pets or animatronic pets instead of real animals?
You take away a lot of the literal responsibility.
Right.
You don't have to bathe it. You don't take it to the vet. You don't let it go to it doesn't go to the bathroom.
Does it retain what really makes it a pet then?
I'm not sure. I mean, you get the kind of comfort level, to go back to what we were talking about last week with like Do Androids Dream.
Yeah.
You have a pet dog, and its point is to be a lap dog and comfort you. So you're like restricting its entire essence down to a particular utility.
Yeah.
Whereas with a living animal, like you have a pet dog, there's a lot more responsibility. But I would also argue that responsibility creates a more intimate relationship because of the necessary amount of interaction and the modes of those interactions that take place.
Mm-hmm. Whereas
if it's something that's limited in its utility, you're actually limiting, I think, that relationship.
Mm-hmm.
But maybe that's what people want. It's not just like because in science fiction everything really has a purpose. It's not just saying you have a robotic pet dog in the future because it's possible.
Right. Although that is the logic of many depictions of science futures.
Right.
It's like, well, maybe people will have robot dogs. We'll give them one.
Or animatronic teddy bears.
Right.
Artificially intelligent teddy bears.
But if we actually try and explore, well, what kind of motivations would be behind wanting one of those rather than actually having a pet, it's hard to see those motivations as coming across as anything other than selfish or self-interested.
I 100% agree. I think particularly the case of AI, the movie, they don't want to give their son a brother or sister. They don't want to have another human child. So they kind of boil down the utility of giving their son a sibling to a particular set of functions, and they're like, well, we'll purchase a product that fulfills those functions and let it assume that role. Mm-hmm. And so you have Teddy. But then Teddy's not enough because the child grows up and Teddy can't evolve with it. And so they have to get another version that's more advanced for a more advanced human that's, no longer a toddler. Mm-hmm. It is, growing up.
You have to remind me, what happens in AI?
Yes.
Haley Joel Osment is a robot that they adopt, and then
they buy him. He's a new line. He's basically like the Nexus 6 or whatever in Do Androids Dream. They're like the newest androids.
Yeah.
They're very lifelike, and he's different than all the other old androids that only provide services. It's Pinocchio. He believes he's like a real boy.
Yeah. But what happens? Their son dies, and they don't want him anymore?
So there's an incident at the son's birthday party, and he gets entangled with them and falls in the pool, and the child nearly drowns, and so they want to return him. And so the mother, who has actually become very attached to him at this point, takes him out to the woods, basically, instead of taking him back to the manufacturer.
Right.
Because she knows he'll be decommissioned or whatever.
Right.
So she drops him off in the woods, basically, and tells him to go. And then him and Teddy end up having all these adventures, and then they meet. I mean, yeah. But that's the gist of him. What we're talking about, him with the family.
Right. Yeah, so when we talk about digital pets in the future, what we're really saying is, people in the future are going to be more selfish. Capitalism will eventually turn what we love in our pets into a set of functions that it can then build and give to us.
Yeah. And children, too, by extension.
Yeah. Although, that's just another...
Or wives or husbands.
Yeah.
You know that as soon as it's possible, people are going to have sex slaves. I mean...
Sure.
Not to be, totally disparaging on the idea of, AI, but it's inevitable. It's inevitable.
Yeah.
Any new technology that arises immediately turns to pornography,
sure.
Sexuality, and I think that's just natural.
Sure.
But again, it's the same thing. It's boiling what could have personality down to its bare utility. Mm-hmm. Which I think you're right in that capitalist model. If you look at the Lacanian capitalist discourse,
right,
there is no pun intended, a lack of movement towards the social order. Right? So that helps feed the whole machine, is this lack of building social bond as part of its very structure, which I think enables a kind of thing like David or Teddy in AI, where you can incorporate something that's substitutive, that's a semblance of... It's like an empty signifier. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? That is only utility, maybe.
So then, getting back to pets and real pets versus artificial pets, it seems in some sense that an artificial pet will eventually happen, and that will take.
Well, haven't we already? What about the Tamagotchi?
Yeah, but
I mean, isn't it not?
Because
it's not a living creature.
It might be the inklings of something or the beginnings of something, but I don't think we're.
Well, what's a pet?
Well, I guess this is what I'm getting at, is that if we look at a fully animatronic or holographic pet in the future that somehow fulfills the function of giving us what we want out of our pets, it seems to me that having a pet, a real pet with real needs, would be, in that case, a very subversive act.
Oh, interesting.
And I wonder, I kind of want to follow this through, but I wonder what having a pet does in terms of maybe helping us get out of ourselves, get out of looking at others as there to fulfill our needs. And it's tricky because when you're talking about pets in particular, because there's also the stereotype of the person with their fat little lapdog who has absolutely no regard or care for a poor person, right? You know, a homeless person or someone in actual need, or spending lavish amounts of money on a pet. Even in understandable cases where, like, you have a pet that's needs a very, very a cat that is going to die without some really expensive procedure,
transplant. Yeah,
and you know there are ethical problems with that. On one sense, when you look at, like, well, I mean, is that really acting out your responsibility towards other human beings in an ethical way? But on the flip side, if we look at the trend towards digital pets and artificial pets as an actual trend, then it seems to me having real pets would kind of disrupt that discourse that's slowly learning to give us everything, or maybe not so slowly, learning to give us everything we want, and turning our relationships with pets into simply
straight commodification,
right, of some kind of entertainment that gives without asking.
See, that brings up two. I think it kind of becomes an environmental double, or not, maybe an ecological double-edged sword. I mean, because there's a massive problem in this country and all over the world, really, with pets. I mean, hundreds of millions of pets that exist. A lot of them are unwanted, you know, and I mean, not taken care of, abused. So you would, on the one hand, if we start really accelerating this model that incorporates artificial pets, you alleviate a lot of that, potentially. Mm-hmm. Yet, at the same time, that, just like the discourse of capitalism that can't do anything except accelerate, once you begin utilizing that idea, and especially defending it ecologically, then you're just going to accelerate it even further to the point where maybe our alienation would be so strong from the idea of an organic pet that is not only subversive to have like an actual living creature as a companion, as like a cat or a dog, like you're saying, but maybe that could be fundamentally detrimental to our collective social psyche. When you think about how important, I mean, we have co-evolved with dogs for over 100,000 years. I mean, we are integral to each other's lives.
And cats have allowed us to co-evolve with them.
Yes, and allow us to think that we are in control. Yeah, but exactly what happens with that? Like, if we accelerate to the point where, because I think in that model, the subject probably wouldn't even consider the fact that they're alienated from that product, right? Well, as the human from the pet, the organic pet, because they have a version of it, a semblance of it. So to them, they wouldn't even recognize that there is a lack and a distance from what that relationship originally had potential to be. I don't know, I'm kind of steamrolling downhill to mix metaphors, but that's interesting as hell. Yeah. I do like that idea of subversion in a future world where that is the model. Yeah. The companion relationship. That to have an actual companion, animal companion, would be kind of subversion. You'd be the weird one. Yeah. Oh, yeah. We're trick-or-treating this year. You better skip Gabe's house. He's a guy that has cats. Real cats. Real cats. Yeah.
Like, I mean, it would be inevitably looked on as a fundamentally disturbed act.
Right.
Right?
Sweet, you have this other creature that poops in your own house?
Right.
You know, and it doesn't talk to you, and, like, it's gonna die? Like, that would be weird. Yeah.
You that would eventually take on a huge stigma.
Everything that exists outside of the utility.
Right. Yeah. Something even far different than the cat lady. Which... Or maybe it would be. It would be the same thing.
I don't know. But see... you know what? It would be kind of like... You're right, because what is the utility... What is the functional utility in that relationship between the cat lady and her cats?
Okay.
What is it?
Yeah.
I mean, I'm asking. I mean, it's the social bond one.
All right. So then maybe we need to look at this from your sort of Aristotelian point of view. Whereas for any kind of action, there are two extremes of action that are negative, right? And maybe one of those extremes is taking your pets as replacements for human social bond.
Okay.
That's the cat lady.
Okay.
Then the other would be taking pets as purely utilitarian entertainments. Like another form of TV, another form of
sit on my lap and purr and be soft.
Right. Another form of commodity.
Right. Yeah.
So I wonder if we can look at those as two extremes. Then
both
what's
perversions of that relationship.
Right. And then the mean would be somewhere between those. But the disturbing thing is that then that mean would we can see that medium, healthy medium being stigmatized as capitalism makes one of those extremes the norm.
Mm-hmm. I see that as an inevitability for sure. I mean, why wouldn't you commodify that if you could?
Yeah.
I mean, absolutely. What's funny about that medium is that it involves all the non-utilitarian aspects of owning or being a companion with another animal.
Right.
Because and like I said earlier, to me, what forms the intimacy of that relationship are those non-utilitarian aspects.
Right.
Like picking up your dog's poop when you go to the park.
Mm-hmm.
It's a pretty intimate act, you
sure.
know, and that you're also invoking a responsibility on top of the act itself. I think there's a lot more that goes into it. That if you have a robotic dog for a pet, you don't have to.
Right.
And you start alleviating and chipping away all these little things that would end up being selling points to commodify that product of the robot dog. You don't have to pick up its poop. It doesn't shed. Blah, blah, blah. You know what I mean? All of these things that would be selling points are actually the things that make that relationship meaningful because it promotes intimacy.
Yeah.
So in a way, that median, if you walk that median, is a subversive act. It would be like trying to approach intimacy ends up standing outside of the social law.
Yeah. Well, I think we can already see this as having happened in our relationship not to pet animals, but to food animals. Where I'm trying to think through this here, but we should have a relationship to the animals that we kill for our food. That is neither sadistic nor mechanized in the way that it is now.
I think that's problematic, even going throughout history, is people would often prefer not to eat their own livestock. They would, you would trade if you have calves, you would trade them for somebody else's.
Yeah, I don't know about that.
I'm just saying, it's hard to even bring something to mind right now, but I can definitely, there's a lot of examples of a child not wanting to eat Bessie the cow to kill for dinner because that was a part of their life.
Right.
You know, and they knew that individual cow. You can eat cow, you can't eat Bessie.
Right.
Do you know what I mean?
Here's the thing. This is what I'm getting at, is that when we were more intimately involved in the killing and processing of our own meat products, our own animals, we could exercise a kind of right action towards those animals by neither being sadistic nor doing what we do now, where we simply turn the animal into a total commodity.
Right.
And I guess what we lose, I mean, beyond the ecological implications of our modern meat system, what we lose is an area in which to exercise right action, or an area to exercise virtue. Like the opportunity's just not even there anymore. Yeah, there's no real way to act virtuously towards the food the meat you prepare, unless you are a weirdo and you go out and have your own little farm and raise your own chickens and eat your own chickens and do all of that. And nobody really wants to do that.
Well, it's more work.
It's a lot more work.
Commodification streamlines life, and it gives you more free time to go
watch television. I guess what's going to happen, I think, with pets is that a person can learn by having a pet. They can grow as a person. Mm-hmm. Doesn't mean that pets should replace our personal relationships. That's one extreme. But we can grow in having a pet. It's not just that the pet exists to serve us and to purr when we want it to purr and do tricks when we want it to do tricks. But I think what we're going to lose is just an area of human action and an area in which virtue could be exercised, and the human being could then grow through that exercise. And that's just going to be closed to us. There'll just be another area of human action that will be impoverished, both by custom and opportunity and the nature of the market. Yeah, the nature, and also the nature of our jobs and things, where even early on, you could have a butcher in town who was the person that butchered your animals, or was the person from whom you bought butchered meat. That's not necessarily bad, but at a certain point, like, I couldn't raise my own meat if I wanted to. Like, I could maybe raise chickens if I wanted to. I couldn't raise beef if I wanted to. I couldn't raise lamb or maybe goats. At a certain point, you just won't have that opportunity to have a real pet.
Yeah.
And you will lose something of what makes you a human being in that. We will, in general.
I totally agree with that. I would like to ask, though, considering that, is that limited to the idea of a particular subset of animals, of pet animals that we would consider more companion species than others? And I mean that, like, your dogs, your cats, by extension, like pigs or goats, other livestock, and then something like a bird, or people that have gerbils, or, you know what I mean? Is there a limit to these, some species that are more companion-like for our nature, and then some others where it wouldn't matter if they were robotic or not, like fish. I mean, if you had like a robot fish and all you had to do is just not feed it, yeah, you lose a little something in that interaction, but do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
It's not something that you don't cuddle up with your fish.
You really wouldn't lose much with a mechanical fish.
You would probably gain a lot more by it always being a clean tank.
Yeah.
In some ways, I'm saying, like, in a capitalist sense, you would gain a lot by your time.
Right.
You know, and I don't know. I'm just saying, it seems like there is a difference there, and I hate to be kind of so human.
Yeah.
in saying that we have the power to make these delineations between which animals are more important as companion species than others. I'm just saying that I think that that's real.
Yeah.
And maybe it's not even so much a difference between mammals and non-mammals, but just in the utility that what you get out in that interaction that is more than utility. Right. We were talking earlier. What do you think? Is there a difference there? Does that make a difference?
Okay. I guess I should be honest. I don't actually like pets. So after all of that spiel about maybe we're losing something and not having digital pets, blah, blah, blah. I don't actually like pets, and I don't like having them. And
Why?
so... Well,
Why? I mean, it may not be easy to pin down, but is it something like that you don't want to, like, take care of poop? Is it something along those lines?
It is. Honestly, it's more hair.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
but that's something you wouldn't have to deal with.
You're absolutely right.
With a synthetic animal.
Right.
Potentially. Unless it was programmed to do things like shed and poop.
Right. Right.
Which is a whole other level of, like, I could just see a future selling point for a company saying that our synthetic dogs are just like the real thing.
Sure.
Like, why the fuck not get a real dog? You know?
Right.
I can see things going full circle, but that's
yeah. Anyway, I bring that up to say that things like lizards or birds, I actually just don't understand what people get out of those kinds of pets, other than they look cool.
And I think you get a lot out of that interaction of taking care of it,
right?
As well,
right. I guess. For me, I had pets growing up. I raised animals, so I did 4-H, and so I raised.
Oh, okay.
I raised sheep. I raised pigs. I had those responsibilities, and I learned from them. And now I don't feel that I need to learn from them anymore.
Gotcha.
I also just had terrible. I had a dog I really loved, and his name was Farley. He was part wolf.
Oh, cool.
And I really enjoyed him. He didn't bark. He would only howl, and he didn't wag his tail, which was interesting. He didn't show that his happiness by wagging his tail or anything like that. What he would do was play tag, full on tag. And, I mean, thinking about it, it's a little disturbing, but it's basically, if you ran, he would chase you down and tag you with his nose, and then you would have to chase him down. And you'd play full-on tag, which was a lot more fun than, like, fetch or a lot of other things. But he jumped, as a wolf, he had these incredibly, or part wolf, I should say. I think he was a quarter wolf. He had these incredibly long legs and could jump incredible heights. And it was impossible to get him to look at our yard as his home and the fence as boundary. And so eventually he just got hit. And that was the last real pet I had. And so there may be part of it is just I'm still a little traumatized about losing pets.
See, I think that is,
and so that might be part of it.
That trauma is interesting because that trauma thing is very important for formulating who you are as a person. Mm-hmm. I'm not saying that everybody has to go through the trauma of losing a pet. I'm not saying that that's necessary, but it definitely is a foundational aspect of a lot of kinds of personalities.
Right.
You take that away when you have a synthetic version of that relationship.
Right.
It's not a real death. It's just like it was a synthetic life, it'd be a synthetic death.
Right. So,
I find that very problematic. I think for many obvious reasons. Mm-hmm. Because, like you're saying, you and Farley playing tag like that. Mm-hmm. Hypothetically, you could do that with a synthetic version of that dog.
Yeah.
But you don't get the same out of it anymore. Really, like
right.
You're missing the ghost in the machine, and then you're You're performing.
Then it's a video game.
Yeah, and it's strictly performative. Maybe, I don't know, that's just the way it seems to me. I think that you can get a lot. I hate to be totally disparaging, because I think that there is a lot you could still get out of that kind of relationship for yourself.
Yeah. But
at the end of the day, it's not really a relationship. Right. It is just you and a product that you could easily also get rid of without any kind of lingering guilt. And I want a new model. You can just throw the old one out.
Yeah.
Just like fitting into that capitalist discourse.
Yeah.
Anyway, you got any last thoughts before we wrap up?
No, that's about it. I mean, after I've railed on about people should have real pets for 45 minutes, I reveal I don't have any pets and don't like them very much and don't ever intend to have any more. But that's fine.
That's fine. It still works as a mental construct.
But it's very important. If you're gonna have pets, have real pets. Maybe that's where we'll leave it off today with the grad lads and the case of duck that was not a duck.
All right, I love it.